U.S. President Donald Trump has announced a 35% tariff on Canadian goods to go into effect on August 1st.
The U.S. tariffs came into effect in the early hours of this morning, and so did the Canadian response.
Because I will put legislation in if he wants to destroy our auto sector and destroy our steel sector. There won't be a grain of critical minerals going south of the border.
You go look at the shelf, Doctor, it has the price. We need to see a Canadian
Queen's
flag.
Park, the word sweeping often gets overused in describing legislation, but in the case of Bill 5, sweeping is just the word
June
for
4th, 2025, the Ontario Conservative government passed Bill 5, a controversial omnibus bill that is designed to accelerate building, boost the economy, and respond to tariffs from
Literally
the U.S.
have gold mines, nickel mines, every type of critical mineral that the world wants, and you're saying, no, I don't want to touch that. By the way, give me money.
Now that Bill 5 and now Bill C5 have undercurrents of racism, and the board showed that through role
More than
today.
300 Indigenous people took to Queen's Park to protest the bill while it was being read in favor, and leaders have warned that blockades and protests could fall into
Well, as
path.
we've been reporting, the Protect Ontario by Unleashing Our Economy Act, or Bill 5, has now been passed, despite the concerns being raised by First Nations.
On the 5th of June 2025, a piece of legislation introduced by the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party, led by Doug Ford, achieved royal assent, effectively coming into law. This law is known as Bill 5, Protect Ontario by Unleashing Our Economy Act. Bill 5 was first introduced to help prepare Ontario's economy for the challenges presented by U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs on Canada, by accelerating infrastructure projects and cutting red tape. It does this by allowing the government to create special economic zones in Ontario, where companies can extract natural resources all while circumventing certain municipal and/or provincial laws. One of these economic zones, called the Ring of Fire, is located in northern Ontario, where many Indigenous communities call this land home. Bill 5's implications raise significant concerns about the potential negative effects on the environment, Ontario's ecosystems, the fight against climate change, local communities, individual liberties, and Indigenous rights. Considering the severe implications for Ontario, it comes as a surprise, according to a Palace data poll, that a majority of Ontarians lack familiarity with Bill 5. Because of that fact, we are looking to uncover what Ontario Bill 5 truly is and what it means for the province, its local communities, and our global environment. When environmental safeguards are weakened, the consequences are felt not just in ecosystems, but in the rights of the people who live alongside them.
Seko Sekogero, Garohonto Yonkats. Hello, my name is Gabriel Miracle. I am a citizen of Tyne-Tenaka Mohawk Territory. I was born and raised here in Ottawa, Ontario. I am a professor of political science focusing on Indigenous governance.
My name is Michael Runts, and I am a naturalist, and I was a professor in the, associate professor in the biology department at Carleton University, where I taught both natural history and ornithology courses for about 38 years in total. During that time, I had the privilege of having over 1,000 students take those courses. Now, all my life I've been a naturalist. I started birdwatching when I was 5 years old, and that has been a passion through my life. I also became a photographer many years ago as well, and as a result I've been able to not only write my own books on natural history, but also illustrate them with my photographs. And I've tried over the years to really learn intimately about Ontario's natural history. So I've focused on this province specifically instead of, the national scene or around the world. And so I've become, I suppose, quite knowledgeable about the flora and fauna of this province.
Ontario's Bill 5 is an omnibus bill that amends several different acts, mainly environmental and regulatory acts, that as a way to fast-track infrastructure development and resource extraction.
This province is dynamic. It has habitats ranging from the Carolinian forest in the deep south, where we have things like opossums and prothonotary warblers, to the subarctic tundra, where we have polar bears and Lapland longspurs and things like that. Western Ontario has prairie. We have things like American white pelicans in Ontario, and to the east where we have nesting peregrine falcons. I think Bill 5 could potentially have the effect of what we saw in previous environmental disasters in North America. Think of the gold rush back in the mid-1800s, where hundreds of thousands of people went out to get rich, destroying rivers and lakes and habitats, forests in the efforts, putting cyanide and other nasty chemicals into the water systems, killing the fish, degrading habitat by extraction of trees along the forest edge to build their structures for mining. And we saw that also in the late 1800s in the Yukon gold rush. That was a major environmental disaster. What that bill does is remove protection for every species of plant and animal in Ontario, removes protection of local habitats to allow big business, the extraction industry, to take advantage of that. And in fact, it changes the Endangered Species Act, which was designed to protect species that were quite rare, with a new term that offers almost zero protection.
We have more liquid gold under our feet than any nation on earth, and by far. And now I fully authorize the most talented team ever assembled to go and get it. It's called Drill, Baby, Drill.
If we continue on this path, the path that President Trump in the States has already established, where money and industry is far more important than our environment, the future holds dire consequences, I believe. It is no doubt it will contribute to climate change. No doubt it'll make species that are currently probably not at risk, and those that are at risk quite possibly endangered. Habitat is not just the area they're currently in. Habitat can be many hundreds, thousands of kilometers away as well. For example, in the boreal forest, we have caribou, and caribou migrate up through Hudson Bay lowland to the tundra for the summer. So therefore, there's a huge part of Ontario that is used by caribou down in the boreal forest. Polar bears, the ones in Ontario are the most southern population of polar bears in the world, and they are critically endangered now because the ice is melting too quickly in Hudson Bay. They have to be on the ice to catch seals, and with a shorter period of ice on Hudson Bay, they're not getting enough food. This bill, if it allows more exploitation of natural resources that hold carbon will not only accelerate the climate change in terms of temperature, but also will affect where species exist currently. And with polar bears, it would be a death note to them.
This piece of legislation poses a significant risk to Aboriginal rights and Indigenous territories. The chief of my community, Don Miracle, has also expressed concerns about the potential threat that this poses to Indigenous lands. Even though Indigenous lands are often conceived as reserves, we have an ongoing relationship with the entire land that we live on, and there is a significant environmental and ecological threat to ways of life, like fishing and trapping. My community specifically sits at the Bay of Quinte, and there is always a risk of significant damage to the waterways, if not the Ring of Fire development, but subsequent developments that may be as a direct result of this piece of legislation. This confirms a suspicion that a lot of Indigenous leaders have had in the past, where free, prior, and informed consent is important until it's inconvenient. Consultation processes can be time-consuming, and in other aspects they can be quite quick, or they can be opportunities to inform, educate, and get the opinions of local communities. Oftentimes consultation is viewed as onerous, but it is really just a matter of doing due diligence, particularly in areas where treaties have been signed. Treaty 9 is one of the earliest modern treaties. It's one of the numbered treaties, and there are certain responsibilities that are embedded within that treaty.
Treaty 9, also known as the James Bay Treaty, negotiated between 1871 and 1921, is an agreement between the Indigenous Cree, Ojibwe peoples, and the Crown, Canada and Ontario. According to the Canadian Encyclopedia, the treaty's purpose was to purchase the interests of the formerly mentioned Indigenous people to lands and resources to make way for white settlement and resource development. It also, like other numbered treaties, contained provisions for cash treaty payments, the creation of reserves, education and hunting, and fishing and trapping rights. Treaty 9 covers a very large part of Ontario, especially around the Hudson Bay and James Bay watershed.
Both provincial and federal government wanting to fast track or circumnavigate free, prior, informed consent or consultation processes really speaks to how Crown Indigenous relationships have changed over the past 2 years, in part because of the sort of existential threat posed by the rhetoric from the United States. When these types of developments are made, oftentimes roadways are built into what was previously undeveloped territories, and it has a potential for people who are not from the community to come into the community with, drugs, alcohol, but also it also poses a threat to Indigenous women, as human trafficking is now sort of a more immediate threat with these types of development. Some of the Indigenous communities that are, particularly in the Ring of Fire area, are in favor of some sort of economic development opportunity, whether it's through mining, lumber, those types of things. But the key thing is that they want to be consulted in a meaningful way. That's the most important thing, and that's often framed as red tape.
9 First Nations in Ontario have filed a court injunction against the federal government's bills to fast-track infrastructure projects. Bill 5 and Bill C5 saying the laws violate their charter rights.
Indigenous sovereignty isn't itself inherently tied to the land. Land is not just a resource. It is where our ancestors are buried. It's where our ceremonies take place. It is critical to who we are as Indigenous peoples. It's critical to who we are as nations. And these types of resource development projects do have economic opportunities for, Indigenous peoples, but there is a lot of concern around what is it doing long term to the land. Sovereignty is something that is inherent to being Indigenous. Sovereignty and recognition of being nations is at the very foundation of Canada becoming a state. So attempting to circumnavigate sovereignty, attempting to circumnavigate nationhood to, extract resources from the land really is, it's indicative of Canadian history, because Canada's main focus since its founding has been based around resource extraction, and Indigenous peoples tend to get in the way of that.
It's worth noting that during the election campaign, Ford never mentioned special economic zones as a tactic that he had planned.
Engagement in provincial politics is, just by judging voter turnout, is down. The general public is not going to be interested in an infrastructure bill or an amendment to an environmental bill. These things aren't sexy. Governance is not sexy by any stretch of the imagination.
I think part of it is media has not done justice to exposing the problems that could arise from this bill. But also, the majority of our population in Ontario resides in large cities. They don't have that same connection to the land. And I think there's some indifference there on behalf of many Ontarians that just have not experienced direct contact with nature.
There is an assumption that pieces of legislation that impact one community don't have the potential to impact another community. There is this assumption that, just because, environmental regulations are being ignored in Northern Ontario and I live in Southern Ontario, that can never happen to me.
Bill 5 would also greenlight a landfill at the edge of the town of Dresden in southwestern Ontario without an environmental assessment.
If a massive landfill can be forced on the edge of our town without full environmental review, whose town is next?
That is often a gross misunderstanding about how governance works. In 5 to 10 years, that same piece of legislation could be used to open up a quarry pit in a small town in Southern Ontario's backyard. Any law that can be applied towards someone you don't like can equally be applied to you in the future.
It is essential that young Ontarians do understand what this bill presents. They are the future of not only this province, but the world in part. And decisions that they can make politically in the future can really have an effect. The impact of Bill 5 could drastically affect what they'll be experiencing in future climates in Ontario. So it's very important for them to understand the implications of the bill, but also be more aware of what politicians can do. And often the changes they do are hidden from us and, with dire consequences.
Manufacturer in Brampton that provides armored cars for a lot of people. ICE, the enforcement agency in the States, has just ordered 20 cars from ICE
That's fantastic. I've been through that plant. They make great military vehicles, and now we need the federal government to start ordering some as well off them. And maybe they are, I'm not too sure.
Don't you see it's ironic with the
I know
tariffs?
it's ironic, but that's all right. We'll take orders anywhere in the world, and thank goodness that the Americans are ordering it off us. They're a great operation there, and maybe you should go and pay it a visit and see all these great employees building armored vehicles.
I'm disappointed with the fact that Canadian manufacturing is being used to support mass deportation of people from the United States, because at least from my perspective, like, there are no illegal people on Indigenous lands. His whole thing is manufacturing and economic development, and who the customer is doesn't really seem to matter to him. Again, kind of makes me think, like, okay, so Ontario has the capacity to build infrastructure or support this type of harassment in the United States, and, you know, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 years later, that those chickens may come home to roost, and we might be dealing with the exact same situation in Ontario.
If you were to have a message to Ontario, Canada, or even the world, what would it be?
Well, we certainly need resources, there's no doubt about that. But resources can be extracted ecologically friendly ways. So my message would be, think about what the effects will be of what is being done to the land, and make sure that we retain, respect the integrity of the land. Ontario's Bill 5, by removing the protection of every living thing pretty well in Ontario, would result in not only a loss of species, but also the acceleration of climate change due to carbon being released from the Hudson Bay lowland, peatland regions. So the message is, learn from past mistakes. Do not proceed without making sure the environment is being protected. Ontario's Bill 5, protect Ontario by unleashing its economy, could end up being destroy Ontario by unleashing its economy. And we have to really juggle the balance between the two of those. But first and foremost, we have to make sure that whatever we do, the environment comes first and we retain its integrity.
Despite all the claims of provincial sovereignty, First Nations and Métis nations are, in point of fact, nations with our own governments, our own cultures, our own languages, and our own laws. The desire for economic development cannot override that, because our ways of understanding and our legal system is older than the province of Ontario, older than Canada. And any efforts to circumnavigate that will be challenged in courts, in political advocacy, in activism. While this is a challenge to Indigenous self-governance, Indigenous self-determination, Indigenous relation to the land, this is not new. This is not the first time that the state has tried to do this, and this won't be the last time. And we are very good at navigating the court system. We are very good at advocating, and we are very good at organizing.
As of March 2026, Doug Ford and the Progressive Conservative government of Ontario have created new controversies by deciding to significantly cut OSAP grant funding.
We are going to shake this entire building, this entire province, and make sure that they hear the power of the people.
Courses and there's not too many baskets being sold out there.
Introducing the Omnibus Bill 60 that shifts the power away from tenants to landlords. Planning to rewrite Ontario's freedom of information laws by effectively excluding all records belonging to the Premier, cabinet ministers, parliamentary assistants, and their staff.
We've got to protect ourselves against the communist Chinese that are infiltrating our country.
And as of recently, has openly supported the deadly US-Israeli war on Iran.
But I think the US and Israel are doing the right thing. I encourage them to keep going.
Potentially relating to Bill 5 and the government's economic and environmental policies, the Ontario government has been accused of risking sewage pollution into Toronto's public shores due to the already expensive and controversial Ontario Place redevelopment. Ontario's Bill 5, Protect Ontario by Unleashing Its Economy Act, has shown to be part of a short-sighted and careless policy-making pattern by the current Ontario government. This piece of legislation is more than just a threat to the plants and animals, it's a threat to the Indigenous ways of living, free and informed prior consent, Ontario's communities, and the individual Ontarian liberty. To the Ontarians watching this, it is essential that you stay informed on not just the environmental policies, but also other provincial policies as they affect you directly. With Ontario's consistently low voter turnout, it is imperative that you vote, as every voice matters. Remember, just because your backyard isn't currently affected, it doesn't mean that the government will not decide to bring your backyard to the chopping block.